All right, this is lesson 20. This is the final lesson of the course. And today we're going to talk about GitHub. So, as usual, we go to GitHub for the lesson, to download the lesson. So we'll go to the course webpage as usual. And one thing you want to do before this lesson, if you haven't, is to create a GitHub account. So if you go to the main GitHub page, and if you were to log out, you'd have the chance to create a new account. So go ahead and do that before proceeding. Then we can access the lesson either of two ways. We'll go down to the last lesson here. So this is Git and GitHub, how to share your code in a public GitHub repository. Now, this lesson is completely on GitHub, so you don't have to copy it to your local computer. But I'm going to, because there's a chance maybe as we go along I'll realize there's something I wanted to change. So I'm gonna go here to raw. Again, you don't have to do this. You're welcome just to follow along on the web page, but and then I use Markdown, which is a program to do my coding. So I'm going to leave that here. I'm going to go back to the web page for now, because it's a nicer interface, I think. Okay. So we've been using GitHub throughout the quarter for just accessing the materials for the course, but we haven't really done much else. But I've been using it, in the background to push changes that I make to the lessons up to my repository. So this is a repository called Python for Data Analysis, and it lives in my user account. And so that's one way you can use GitHub. You can have a repository that's owned by you, and you can contribute changes to it. You can contribute or add new files, change files, remove files, and then have that locally on your computer where you're having version control over all the aspects of that repository. And then when you want, you can push those changes up to github.com, which is a online version of your repository that is accessible to the world. By default, GitHub is public, so if you want to have a private repository, you have to pay for the service. That's how they make money. But for most of us, we want to be about open science. So ideally, you're only sharing things that you're willing for other people to see. So the other alternative is you can have a shared repository, or you can go to someone else's repository and you can fork it. And when you fork it, you make a copy of it to your own account, and then you get all the files, all the code, everything to your account, and then you can download that to your computer, and you can work on everything locally. And you can make a different version of it. You can play with it. If you think you can improve it, or you think you've done something that someone else would like, that the community working on that repository would like, you can make that change. You can push that back up to your account, and then you can issue a pull request and say, I think you should pull in my content because I think I made it better. And then you can have a discussion with people about your pull request and why you want that code to be included. We're going to cover all this a couple times. So this is just the overview. So as it says here, GitHub is a code hosting platform for version control and collaboration. So it's kind of two separate things that fit together. It lets you and others work together on projects from anywhere. So you can be in any time zone, any part of the world. You can even work offline and then push your changes up after you have an internet connection. At the heart of GitHub is an open source version control system, or VCS. It's actually a distributed version control system, or DVCS, called Git. And Git is responsible for everything GitHub related that happens locally on your computer. So first thing we're going to do is go over this GitHub flow. So I've listed the main steps here, and then there's a web page here that we can click on. And if we click on that, and I'll make it a little bigger. So there's, if we go actually to this link here, guides, there's all these lessons or guides for getting started. We're going to cover the big stuff on here. So there's some stuff about Markdown, which we've used. GitHub uses Markdown. There's some stuff about issues, citable, social aspects, forking. We're not going to deal a lot with this stuff. The main thing we will cover the Git handbook. We will cover this Hello World tutorial, and we'll talk about now the GitHub flow. So, as it says here, GitHub Flow is a lightweight branch-based workflow that supports teams and projects where deployments are made regularly. And we'll talk about how this works here. So, first what happens is you're going to create a branch. This will be where you're going to work. So you have a this is generally referring to when you have a shared repository or someone else's repository that you're going to fork, and then you name your fork as a branch, and the branch you can have multiple branches of the same repository, and then when you're done, you can merge that branch into the master, which is the starting one, or the one that everyone else is using. Once you create your branch, you can start adding commits. So now you're going to be adding files, deleting files, editing files, and adding them to your branch. And this keeps track of everything that's going on. And it provides a history of what you've done and why. Because every time you add a commit, you issue a message and saying, here's what I did. Once you've started making some commits, when you're ready to start having a discussion with others on the repository about your code, you can open a pull request. And so a pull request, basically, it says I want to merge this code with the master branch, which is what's up here. It's the deployed version of the code that should be functional, or at least be the kind of the gold standard of where it's tested code. So you start that process, but you don't necessarily have to be ready to merge your code. Typically you would, but in some cases you might be only partway through your changes and you're ready to have a discussion. So then there's a discussion and review of your code. So other people who are sharing this code will have a discussion about it, and maybe they'll identify things that, like some bugs, or you might, you're not following the style, like that PEP 8 style we talked about last time, for example, or you haven't done some unit tests, or whatever kind of things need to be done to your code before it's ready to be merged. That this happens at this stage. And you make some more commits, I should say. So these little circles are more commits. So you will make more changes to your code and commit those changes. And then if this is the kind of code that you would be well, pretty much any kind of code is going to be runnable. Even the code for this course, which is notebook, still has to function. So you're going to deploy it. You're going to test it as if it was going to be used by everyone. So it has to be solid. So after your code is sort of deployed on your branch for testing, then you can finally merge your code into the master branch. And you can then delete your branch if you want, but the record of what you did and the pull request will be preserved so that someone can go back and look and see what happened at this stage in the code. So we go back to the lesson. So I've just summarized those steps here. You create a branch. Which is a copy of your project. So there's two sort of levels of copies. There's a fork where you actually take a repository and you make a copy, or effectively you make a copy in your account. But within your own fork, you can have multiple branches. So you have your copy of this code, but you might want to play around with one aspect of the code and leave the rest alone. And maybe the next day you say, I want to mess around with another aspect of the code, but have everything else stay the same. So you don't want to be working on too many things at once, because you could break some dependency between your code, and then it gets more complicated. So you could imagine a scenario where you wanted to have multiple forks where you're testing different things. This is kind of like how we use Conda environments, right? We have different Conda environments maybe for different projects, and we might have different versions that we want to be able to control. So, and even if you haven't forked a repository, even if you're just working on your own repository, you still might want to have multiple branches where you are changing different things. Alternatively, you might not have any branches. It's possible you can work on the master branch. So when I'm making edits for this course, I'm typically working on master, which means as soon as I push my changes to GitHub, it just simplifies the process. I don't have to create a separate branch, push that, and then merge my branch with master, because I'm the only one working on it. So if you have a project where it's just you, and this might be a good place to start with GitHub, you want to publish your code for this paper that you're writing, right? If you're the only one really working with that code, maybe no one else is reviewing it. Eventually someone will review it, but you can imagine maybe just having a very simple workflow where you're just making changes on your computer and pushing those changes to GitHub, and they're going to show up right away. So it depends what you're trying to do. For most of what we'll talk about today, we'll talk about what GitHub was really meant for, which is a collaborative coding platform with a version control system. Okay, so again, we create a branch. In the typical workflow, we create a branch, we add commits, we open a pull request, we start discussing and review the code, we continue to add commits, we deploy the code, and then we merge it with the master. So there's a lot of terminology. I've kind of bolded the main terms here. These terms have very specific meanings, and we'll start to understand what those are. A couple other terms are repository. So this is the project. It's effectively a directory that can have multiple subdirectories beneath it, but this is a directory or a folder that has all the code for the project. And when you clone a repository, or I guess that's another term I should add. I'm going to add this. I will add this later. I don't want to delay us, but talk about what cloning is. It's it's related to forking. So let's say you have there's a repository you like that you want to work on. You fork it on GitHub and then you clone it to your machine. So it's like cloning is like downloading, but it makes an identical copy of some version that's on GitHub. So you might clone a repository. Issues are just what they say. They're issues or tasks in the project that need work. So on GitHub, for example, if I do a command click, so I open up a new tab for this course, I'll go to the issues. So there aren't any open issues right now, but if I go to, we're looking at open issues. If I look at closed issues, I made an issue that said have you guys fill out a survey, and we did that, so I closed the issue. But if you wanted to make issue, you could go up here and click on new issue and say, hey Luke, I found this bug in your code, and you might want to fix it, or it'd be really great if you mentioned this. You could create an issue for me, and I would see it, and I would try to fix it, and then once I fixed it, I would write a little comment, say thanks for the feedback, I fixed it. It's fixed in commit number blank or etc., and then I can close the issue.